Okay, so I think I have finished everything. Well, everybody's here already. Or not everybody, but certainly some people are here. Hello, Jared. Hello, Kelly. Hello, Alexis. Yes, release that Kraken bitch. Yes, absolutely, Alexis. You are absolutely right. Humor her. She's dangerous. And Nancy. Hi, Nancy. And hi, Becca. Yes, and various others I'm sure will be showing up. And I am here, and we are. Hello, there's Emily. Oh, and there's Barban. Hello, this is cool. Anyway, so here we are. It is another Sunday evening in California. Sunny California today. You may notice I even have a few top buttons on button, but if you want to see more, you're going to have to go to my fans only website. No, I don't have one of those. But I think the idea amuses me nevertheless. It's like nobody ever says, hey, we need more naked pictures of writers. I don't know why, but they just don't. Anyway, so I am going to instead read. That's what you get out of me, folks. You get fun, you get laughs, you get comradeship, you get, or as the French say, camaraderie, or you get all kinds of silliness. But what you do get always is me reading something. So I'm going to be reading tonight. And I thought I'd actually start another two-part story that is a bit on the long side, so it's going to have to split up into two. It's one of my oldest stories, and it also has had one of the strangest, well, at least the most convoluted histories. But rather than try and explain that to you, I'll read you the introduction before I start the story, because that kind of explains what course it went through on its way to the form you're going to hear tonight, which is not the final form. It is the final form of the short story version, but as I said, I'll explain that in a moment. Meanwhile, I sit here in the basement office of Casa Beale Williams with a large cat who's finishing her dinner, and a very large and difficult to see stuffed gorilla back in the corner. That's Coco. I've been posting Coco pictures today because I was thinking about her. That is not an actual live gorilla. That is the beautiful stuffed Coco that my publisher gave me when I finished the very last of the first set of Ostenard books, namely To Green Angel Tower. And Betsy, who is a very generous, gift-giving kind of a person, sent it to me as a tribute to finally getting the monkey off my back. So Coco has lived with us ever since, and has been through been many places. I think we first got her back in the UK, maybe? Yeah, it would have been back in the UK, or may have been before I moved to there, but I think it was in the UK. But anyway, we've had Coco for a long time, and she goes everywhere with us. You can't see her, but someday I'll take a proper picture of her and put her on, because as stuffed gorillas go, she is a beaut, although she has had to survive. She's had to survive decades in our household, which, as you can see with me, it's not good for you. Not good for anybody. Anyway, so as I continue, show the cat. Tash wants to see the cat. Okay, well, she's turned away now, so I can try and show her to you, but I don't know if you can see her because she's sort of there. Cat. Cat. Cat bowl. Cat food, now in cat. She's a very fine cat. She's learning to go outside now, and we got her. She had been basically living in a bathroom for several years. And now she is learning to go outside, tentatively. She's not rushing into anything. She's gone down to the end of the back porch here, which is about 6 feet. But she has enjoyed the sun. So anyway, so that is Cat. That is Lily. Who has many names. I told you that I sometimes call her Lily Vanilli because she looks like she might have two slender German men hiding inside her. Lily con carne, because there is a lot of meat on that cat, and various other things. Anyway, so, and upstairs we have young people and several dogs. And Deb, of course, and right now it's just me and the cat downstairs, I think. Anyway, so I am going to read tonight. I'm going to read you the story version of Child of an Ancient City. And Child of an Ancient City has also been a a short novel as well. But as I'll read to you in the introduction, that was part of its complicated history. What else? Anything else I wanted to go over with you before we started? No, just, it's the same thing I told everybody last night. Things are just kind of much of a muchness here. We are, yes. Sorry, I'm just responding to somebody writing Gingy in the thing. She's a Gingy, and I used to be a Gingy before I started to turn these colors. But I was kind of a half ginger, but I'm still proud. I still wear my ginger pride proudly. So the story is going to come in just a second. As far as all of us, we are good. We are well. We are hunkering down. Obviously, those who live in the States know we've had a huge resurgence. What a surprise. Yeah. What a surprise when everybody is running around going, open up the economy, open up the economy. This coronavirus stuff it's a conspiracy. It's a liberal conspiracy. Which, by the way, is not to suggest that I don't have other political concerns besides the idiots who refuse to wear masks and who think it's a good idea to go out drinking with their buddies because, after all, they probably won't die. I have a lot of other political concerns, but I'm trying to keep political concerns off of this so this can be just a place to listen to stories. So, but trust me, I am an angry, bitter old man about many things happening in our world at the moment. And if you want to join me on my Facebook page or my Twitter stream or any of those things, you can hear me rant and rave about various of my other concerns about the state of the world. And in particular, some of the absolute shocking idiots who are in charge, not just in America, but in many other countries as well. But as I said, that's not where I'm going here tonight. So what I am going to do is I'm going to read to y'all, and I'm going to get about halfway through the story, and then I'm going to stop. And then next Sunday, same time, I will probably be able to finish it off because I think it's only about 40 pages or so. So I will read somewhere around 20, 21, 22 tonight, depending on where a good stopping point is. And yeah, that's it. Otherwise, we're all good here. We're hanging in. We're hunkered down. We're trying to keep the level of domestic horror and messiness and the dirt and, God, the horrors of having 3 dogs, a couple of them who shed vigorously, and one of them who seems to have no conception of house training whatsoever. But that's Chihuahuas for you, okay? Chihuahuas were not my idea. I was a reluctant Chihuahua parent, I guess. But enough of my trials and travails. It's definitely complaining about your Chihuahua pissing on everything is definitely a first world problem because it's not a first world problem. It's a stupid world problem because people who aren't stupid probably don't have pissing Chihuahuas. Anyway, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from Childhood of an Ancient City. Because this is an old story now, and the only thing I think I currently have it in is in Wright, which was my first collection. And, well, there's nice illustrations in this book, I have to say. And that is an illustration from the story. That darkish thing in the upper corner is the antagonist. And we will learn more about that in a moment. But first, I am going to read to you from the introduction so you will understand the strange and checkered origins of Child of an Ancient City. I wrote this originally about a bunch of French crusaders getting separated from their European army after having their collective arses kicked by the Turks at the famous Battle of Nicopolis in 1396 in what is now Bulgaria. The lost soldiers had to make their way back across Transylvania, not the best place to wander the wilderness. I rewrote the story and changed the setting for As I Recall. Now, mind you, that was me trying to recall back when this book came out, which was a good decade ago or so. I rewrote the story and changed the setting for As I Recall, an Arabian Nights anthology, but didn't submit it to that anthology for some reason. Then, when I was solicited for a story by John Betancourt of the newly reborn Weird Tales magazine, I sent them the Arabianized version you see here. Several years later, John Betancourt was working with the late Byron Preiss and asked if I wanted to lengthen Child of an Ancient City into a sort of YA, young adult book, for a new imprint they were starting. I didn't have much free time then, but John offered to hire Nina Kariki Hoffman to help me with the longer version. Nina, as expected, did wonderful work and was great fun to work with as well, and the longer version was duly printed. Let me suggest also, basically what Nina did mostly was, as you'll see, there is a storytelling element in this story. And what Nina did, and a large part of how we, excuse me, a large part of how we expanded the story to make it a suitable short novel, was we added a bunch of stories. And Nina wrote most of the stories that we added. So it is worth picking up the novel version of Child of an Ancient City, which is, probably available, although I'm sure it's out of print. But you could probably find it at a library. Anyway, it's worth it to pick up the book just to see all the really cool things that Nina came up with in her additions to the story. Because for those of you who don't know Nina, you actually would benefit from reading any of her stories. She's an excellent story writer, an excellent writer in general, a quite fabulous human being, one of my favorite people in our field, and she deserves support of all people who love to read well-written fantasy and science fiction. Anyway, but that's the long version. The short version, the short story version, continues here. So Nina, and the longer version was duly printed, but this version is the original. Well, okay, the original was full of French crusaders, which explains why there's so much drinking. I always regretted that the story was built so much around a drinking party, which is not really Islamic. I try to make myself feel better by remembering that the many people in the Islamic world of that time, the first couple of hundred years, even famous emperors of the Ottoman Turks, who regularly broke the Prophet's injunctions against intoxicating drink. Okay, so I'm saying there is some historical precedent, especially in the first couple of hundred years of Islam, for people drinking and continuing on in that mode, which they had been in since biblical days and before, no doubt. Still, continuing the introduction, if I had to do it all again, I'd probably change the protagonists back to French crusaders, who would have no reason whatsoever to abstain from a few celebratory glasses of wine. So that is my disclaimer. I realize that alcohol is frowned on in Islam. This is set back in roughly the time of the imaginary Arabian Nights, and in the early days, there is a little bit of wiggle room because people did continue to drink for quite a long time in Islam. Anyway, but as I mentioned, it's basically a cheap out because it was originally a story about French crusaders. So, without further ado, and at almost 7:15 at night, I will finally start with Child of an Ancient City. Merciful Allah! I am as a calf fatted for slaughter. Masrur al-Adan roared with laughter and crashed his goblet down on the polished wood table. Once, twice, thrice. A trail of crescent-shaped dents followed his hand. I can scarce move for gorging. The fire was banked, and shadows walked the walls. Masrur's table, for he was master here, stood scatter-spread with the bones of small fowl. Masrur leaned forward and squinted across the table. A calf, he said. Fatted. He belched absently and wiped his mouth with wine-stained sleeve. Ibn Fahad broke off a thin, cold smile. We have indeed wreaked massacre on the race of pigeons, old friend. His slim hand swept above the littered tabletop. We have also put the elite guard of your wine cellars to flight. And as usual, I thank you for your hospitality, but do you not sometimes wonder if there's more to life than growing fat in the service of the caliph? Or caliph, but I'm going to say caliph. Ha! Masrur goggled his eyes. Doing the caliph's bidding has made me wealthy. I have made myself fat. He smiled. The other guests laughed and whispered. Abu Jamir, a fatter man in an equally stained robe, toppled a small tower erected from the bones of squab. The night is young, good Masrur, he shouted. Have someone fetch up more wine and let us hear some stories. Baba, Masrur bellowed. Come here, you old dog. Within 3 breaths, an old servant stood in the doorway, looking to his sportive master with apprehension. Bring us the rest of the wine, Baba, or have you drunk it all? Baba pulled at his grizzled chin. But you drank it, master. You and Master Ibn Fahad took the last 4 jars with you when you went to shoot arrows at the weathercock. Just as I suspected, Masrur nodded. Well, get on across the bazaar to Abu Jamir's place. Wake up his manservant and bring back several jugs. The good Jamir says we must have it now. Baba disappeared. The chagrined Abu Jamir was cheerfully back-thumped by the other guests. A story, someone shouted. A tale. Oh, yes, a tale of your travels, Master Masrur. This was young Hassan, sinfully drunk. No one minded. His eyes were bright, and he was full of innocent stupidity. Someone said you have traveled to the green lands of the north. The north? Masrur grumbled, waving his hand as though confronted with something unclean. No, that I cannot give to you. His face clouded, and he slumped back on his cushions. His tarbushed head swayed. Ibn Fahad knew Masrur like he knew his horses. Indeed, Masrur was the only human that could claim so much of Ibn Fahad's attention. He had seen his old comrade drink twice this quantity and still dance like a dervish on the walls of Baghdad, but he thought he could guess the reason for this sudden incapacity. Oh, Masrur, please! Hassan had not given up. He was as unshakable as a young falcon with its first prey beneath its talons. Tell us of the north. Tell us of the infidels. A good Muslim should not show such interest in unbelievers. Abu Jamir sniffed piously, shaking the last drops from a wine jug. If Masrur does not wish to tell a tale, let him be. Ha! Snorted the host, recovering somewhat. You only seek to stall me, Jamir, so that my throat shall not be so dry when your wine arrives. No, I have no fear of speaking of unbelievers. Allah would not have given them a place in the world for their own if they had not some use. Rather, it is certain other things that happen which make me hesitate. He gazed kindly on young Hassan, who in the depths of his drunkenness looked about to cry. Do not despair, Eglin. Perhaps it would do me good to unfold this story. I have kept the details long inside. He emptied the dregs of another jar into his cup. I still feel it so strongly, though. Bitter, bitter times. Why don't you tell the story, my good friend, he said over his shoulder to Ibn Fahad. You played as much a part as did I. No, Ibn Fahad replied. Drunken puppy Hassan emitted a strangled cry of despair. But why, old comrade? Masrur asked, pivoting his bulk to stare in amazement. Did the experience so chill even your heart? Ibn Fahad glowered. Because I know better. As soon as I start, you will interrupt, adding details here, magnifying there, then saying, No, I cannot speak of it. Continue, old friend. Before I have taken up another breath, you will interrupt me again. You know you will wind up doing all the talking, Masrur. Why do you not start from the beginning and save me my breath? All laughed, but Masrur, who put on a look of wounded solicitousness. Of course, old friend, he murmured. I had no idea that you harbored such grievances. Of course I shall tell the tale. A broad wink was offered to the table. No sacrifice is too great for a friendship such as ours. Poke up the fire, will you, Baba? Oh, he's gone. Hassan, will you be so kind? When the youth was again seated, Masrur took a swallow, stroked his beard, and began. In those days, Masrur said, I myself was but a lowly soldier in the service of Harun al-Rashid, may Allah grant him health. I was young, strong, a man who loved wine more than he should, but what soldier does not, and a good deal more trim and comely than you see me today. My troop received a commission to accompany a caravan going north, bound for the land of the Armenites, beyond the Caucasian mountains. A certain prince of that people had sent a great store of gifts as tribute to the caliph, inviting him to open a route for trade between his principality and our caliphate. Harun al-Rashid, wisest of wise men that he is, did not exactly make the camels groan beneath the weight of the gifts that he sent in return, but he sent several courtiers, including the under-vizier Walid al-Salameh, to speak for him and to assure this Armenite prince that rich rewards would follow when the route over the Caucasians was opened for good. We left Baghdad in grand style, pennants flying, the shields of the soldiers flashing like golden dinars, and the caliph's gifts bundled onto the backs of a gang of evil, contrary donkeys. We followed the banks of the faithful Tigris, resting several days at Mosul, then continued through the eastern edge of Anatolia. Already, as we mounted northward, the land was beginning to change, the clean sands giving way to rocky hills and scrub. The weather was colder and the skies gray, as though Allah's face was turned away from that country. But the men were not unhappy to be out from under the desert sun. Our pace was good. There was not a hint of danger except the occasional wolf howling at night beyond the circles of the campfires. Before 2 months had passed, we had reached the foothills of the Caucasians, what is called the steppe country. For those of you who have not strayed far from Baghdad, I should tell you that the northern lands are like nothing you have seen. The trees there grow so close together you could not throw a stone 5 paces without striking one. The land itself seems always dark. The trees mask the sun before the afternoon is properly finished, and the ground is damp. But in truth, the novelty of it fades quickly, and before long it seems that the smell of decay is always with you. We caravaneers had been over 8 weeks a-traveling, and the bite of homesickness was strong. But we contented ourselves with the thought of the accommodations that would be ours when we reached the palace of the prince, laden as we were with our caliph's good wishes and the tangible proof thereof. We had just crossed the high mountain passes and begun our journey down when disaster struck. We were encamped one night in a box canyon, 1,000 steep feet below the summit of the tall Caucasian peaks. The fires were not much but glowing coals, and nearly all the camp was asleep except for 2 men standing sentry. I was wrapped in my bedroll, dreaming of how I would spend my earnings when a terrible shriek awakened me. Sitting groggily upright, I was promptly knocked down by some bulky thing tumbling onto me. A moment's horrified examination showed that it was one of the sentries, throat pierced with an arrow, eyes bulging with his final surprise. Suddenly there was a chorus of howls from the hillside above us. All I could think of was wolves, that the wolves were coming down on us. In my witless state, I could make no sense of the arrow at all. Even as the others sprang up around me, the camp was suddenly filled with leaping, whooping shadows. Another arrow hissed past my face in the darkness, and then something crashed against my bare head, filling the nighttime with a great splash of light that illuminated nothing. I fell back, insensible. I could not tell how long I had journeyed in that deeper darkness when I was finally roused by a sharp boot prodding at my rib cage. I looked up at a tall, cruel figure, cast by the cloud-curtained morning sun in bold silhouette. As my sight adjusted, I saw a knife-thin face, dark-browed and fierce, with mustachios long as a Tartar herdsman's. I felt sure that whoever had struck me had returned to finish the job, and I struggled weakly to pull my dagger from my sash. This terrifying figure merely lifted one of his pointy boots and trod delicately on my wrist, saying in perfect Arabic, "Wonders of Allah, this is the dirtiest man I have ever seen." It was Ibn Fahad, of course. The caravan had been of good size, and he had been riding with the Armanite and the under-vizier, not back with the hoi polloi, so we had never spoken. Now you see how we first truly met. Me on my back, covered with mud, blood, and spit, and Ibn Fahad standing over me like a rich man examining vegetables in the bazaar. Infamy. Ibn Fahad had been blessed with what I would come later to know as his usual luck. When the bandits, who must have been following us for some days, came down upon us in the night, Ibn Fahad had been voiding his bladder some way down slope. Running back at the sound of the first cries, he had sent more than a few mountain bandits down to hell, courtesy of his swift sword, but they were too many. He pulled together a small group of survivors from the main party, and they fought their way free, then fled along the mountain in the darkness, listening to the screams echoing behind them, cursing their small numbers and ignorance of the country. Coming back in the light of the day, to scavenge for supplies as well as ascertain the nature of our attackers, Ibn Fahad had found me, a fact he has never allowed me to forget, and for which I have never allowed him to evade responsibility. While my wounds and bandit spites were doctored, Ibn Fahad introduced me to the few survivors of our once great caravan. One was Suzri al-Din, a cheerful lad, fresh-faced and smooth-cheeked as young Hassan here, dressed in the robes of a rich merchant's son. The soldiers who had survived rather liked him and called him Fawn, to tease him for his wide-eyed good looks. There was a skinny wretch of a chief clerk named Abdallah, purse-mouthed and iron-eyed, and an indecently plump young mullah who had just left the madrasa and was getting a rather rude introduction to life outside the seminary. Ruad, the mullah, looked as though he would prefer to be drinking and laughing with the soldiers. Beside myself and Ibn Fahad, there were 4 or 5 more of these, while Abdallah, the prim-faced clerk, looked as though he should be the one who never lifted his head out of the Quran. Well, in a way that was true, since for a man like Abdallah, the balanced book is the holy book. May Allah forgive such blasphemy. There was one other, notable for the extreme richness of his robes, the extreme whiteness of his beard, and the vast weight of his personal jewelry. Walid al-Salameh, the under-vizier to His Eminence the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. Wahid was the most important man of the whole party. He was also, surprisingly, not a bad fellow at all. So there we found ourselves, the rack of the Caliph's embassy, with no hope but to try and find our way back home to a strange, hostile land. The upper reaches of the Caucasians are a cold and godless place. The fog is thick and wet. It crawls in of the morning, leaves briefly at the time the sun is high, then comes creeping back long before sunset. We had been sodden as well-diggers from the moment we had stepped into the foothills. A treacherous place, those mountains, home of bear and wolf, covered in a forest so thick that in places the sun was lost completely. Since we had no guide, indeed it was several days before we saw any sign of inhabitants whatsoever, we wandered unsteered, losing half as much ground as we gained for walking in circles. At last we were forced to admit our need for a trained local eye. In the middle slopes, the trees grew so thick that fixing our direction was impossible for hours at a time. We were divining the location of Mecca by general discussion, and, blasphemy again, we probably spent as much time praying toward Aleppo as to Mecca. It seemed a choice between possible discovery or certain doom. We came down by night and took a young man out of an isolated shepherd's hovel, as quietly as ex-brigands like ourselves, Or at least, like many of us, Ibn Fahad, my apologies, could. The family did not wake, the dog did not bark. We were 2 leagues away before sunrise, I'm sure. I felt sorry in a way for the young peasant lout we'd kidnapped. He was a nice fellow, although fearfully stupid. I wonder if we are now an old dull story with which he bores his children. In any case, once this young rustic, whose name, as far as I could tell, was unpronounceable by civilized tongues, realized that we were not ghosts or genii, and were not going to kill him on the spot, he calmed down and was quite useful. We began to make real progress, reaching the peak of the nearest ridge in 2 days. There was a slight feeling of celebration in the air that night, our first in days under open skies. The soldiers cursed the lack of strong drink, but spirits were good nonetheless. Even Ibn Fahad pried loose a smile. As the under-vizier Walid told a humorous story, I looked about the camp. There were but 2 grim faces. The clerk, Abdallah, which was to be expected since he seemed a patently sour old devil, and the stolen peasant boy. I walked over to him. "Oh, young one," I said, "why do you look so downcast? Have you not realized that we are good-hearted, God-fearing men and will not harm you?" He did not even raise his chin, which rested on his knees, shepherd style, but he turned his eyes up to mine. "It is not those things," he said in his awkward Arabic. "It is not you soldiers, but this place." "Gloomy mountains they are indeed," I agreed, "but you have lived here all your young life. Why should it bother you?" "Not this place. We never come here. It is unholy. The vampire walks these peaks." "Vampire?" said I, "and what peasant devil is that?" He would say no more. I left him to his brooding and walked back to the fire. The men all had a good laugh over the vampire, making jesting guesses as to what type of beast it might be. But Ruad, the young mullah, waved his hands urgently. "I have heard of such afrits," he said. "They are not to be laughed at by such a godless lot as yourselves." He said this as a sort of scolding joke, but he wore a strange look on his round face. We listened with interest as he continued. "The vampire is a restless spirit. It is neither alive nor dead, and Shaitan possesses its soul utterly. It sleeps in a sepulchre by day, and when the moon rises, it goes out to feed upon travelers, to drink their blood." Some of the men again laughed loudly, but this time it rang, false as a brass merchant's smile. "I have heard of these from one of our foreign visitors," said the under-vizier, Walid, quietly. "He told me of a plague of these vampire in a village near Smyrna. All the inhabitants fled, and the village is still uninhabited today." This reminded someone else, myself perhaps, of a tale about an afrit with teeth growing on both sides of his head. Others followed with their own demon stories. The talk went on late into the night, and no one left the campfire until it had completely burned out. By noon the next day we had left the heights and were passing back down into the dark, tree-blanketed ravines. When we stopped that night, we were once more hidden from the stars, out of sight of Allah and the sky. I remember waking up in the foredawn hours. My beard was wet with dew, and I was damnably tangled up in my cloak. A great dark shape stood over me. I must confess to making a bit of a squawking noise. "It's me," the shape hissed. It was Rifaq, one of the other soldiers. "You gave me a turn." Rifaq chuckled. "Thought I was that vampire, eh? Sorry, just stepping out for a piss." He stepped over me, and I heard him trampling the underbrush. I slipped back into sleep. The sun was just barely over the horizon when I was again awakened, this time by Ibn Fahad, tugging at my arm. I grumbled at him to leave me alone, but he had a grip on me like an almsbeggar. Rifak's gone, he said. Wake up. Have you seen him? He walked on me in the middle of the night on his way to go moisten a tree, I said. He probably fell in the darkness and hit his head on something. Have you looked? Several times, Ibn Fahad responded. All around the camp. No sign of him. Did he say anything to you? Nothing interesting. Perhaps he's met the sister of our shepherd boy and is making the two-backed beast. Ibn Fahad made a sour face at my crudity. Perhaps not. Perhaps he has met some other beast. Don't worry, I said. If he hasn't fallen down somewhere close by, he'll be back. But he did not come back. When the rest of the men arose, we had another long search with no result. At noon, we decided, reluctantly, to go on our way, hoping that if he had strayed somewhere, he could catch up with us. We hiked down into the valley, going farther and farther into the trees. There was no sign of Rifak, although from time to time we stopped and shouted in case he was searching for us. We felt there was small risk of discovery, for that dark valley was as empty as a pauper's purse, but nevertheless, after a while, the sound of our own voices echoing back through the damp glades became unpleasant. We continued on in silence. Twilight comes early in the bosom of the mountains. By mid-afternoon, it was already growing dark. Young Fawn, the name had stuck against the youth's protest, who of all of us was the most disturbed by the disappearance of Rifak, stopped the company suddenly, shouting, "Look there!" We straightway turned to see where he was pointing, but the thick trees and shadows revealed nothing. "I saw a shape," the young one said. "It was just a short way back, following us. Perhaps it is the missing soldier." Naturally, the men ran back to look, but though we scoured the bushes, we could find no trace of anyone. We decided that the failing light had played Fawn a trick, that he had seen a hind or some such. 2 other times he called out that he saw a shape. The last time one of the other soldiers glimpsed it too, a dark, man-like form moving rapidly beneath the trees, a bow shot away. Close inspection still yielded no evidence, and as the group trod wearily back to the path again, Walid, the under-vizier, turned to Fawn with a hard, flat look. "Perhaps it would be better, young master, if you talked no more of shadow shapes." "But I saw it," the boy cried. "That soldier Muhammad saw it too." "I have no doubt of that," answered Walid al-Salameh. But think on this. We have gone several times to see what it might be, and have found no sign of any living man. Perhaps our Rifak is dead. Perhaps he fell into a stream, drowned, or hit his head upon a rock. His spirit may be following us because it does not wish to stay in this unfamiliar place. That does not mean we want to go and find it. But enough, spat the chief clerk, Abdallah. You heard the under-vizier, young prankster. We shall have no more talk of your godless spirits. You will straightway leave off telling such things. Your concern is appreciated, Abdallah, Walid said coldly, but I do not require your help in this matter. The vizier strode away. I was almost glad the clerk had added his voice, because such ideas would not keep the journey in good order. But, like the under-vizier, I too had been rubbed and grated by the clerk's high-handedness. I am sure others felt the same, for no more was said on the subject all evening. Allah, though, always has the last word, and who are we to try to understand his ways? We bedded down a very quiet camp that night, the idea of poor Rifak's lost soul hanging unspoken in the air. From a thin, unpleasant sleep, I woke to find the camp in chaos. "It's Mohammed, the soldier," Fawn was crying. "He's been killed. He's dead." It was true. The mullah Ruad, first up in the morning, had found the man's blanket empty, then found his body a few short yards out of the clearing. "His throat has been slashed out," said Ibn Fahad. It looked like a wild beast had been at him. The ground beneath was dark with blood, and his eyes were wide open. Above the cursing of the soldiers and the murmured holy words of the mullah, who looked quite green of face, I heard another sound. The young shepherd lad, grimly silent all the day before, was rocking back and forth on the ground by the remains of the cook fire, moaning. Vampire, he wept, vampire, the vampire. All the companions were, of course, completely unmanned by these events. While we buried Muhammad in a hastily dug grave, those assembled darted glances over their shoulders into the forest vegetation. Even Ruad, as he spoke the words of the Holy Quran, had trouble keeping his eyes down. Ibn Fahad and I agreed between ourselves to maintain that Muhammad had fallen prey to a wolf or some other beast, but our fellow travelers found it hard even to pretend agreement. Only the under-vizier and the clerk Abdallah seemed to have their wits finally about them, and Abdallah made no secret of his contempt of the others. We set out again at once. Our company was somber that day, and no wonder. No one wished to speak of the obvious, nor did they have much stomach for talk of lighter things. It was a silent file of men that moved through the mountain fastness. As the shadows of evening began to roll down, the dark shape was with us again, flitting along just in sight, disappearing for a while only to return, bobbing along behind us like a jackdaw. My skin was crawling, as you may well believe, though I tried to hide it. We set camp, building a large fire and moving near to it, and had a sullen, close-cramped supper. Ibn Fahad, Abdallah, the vizier, and I were still speaking of the follower only as some beast. Abdallah may have even believed it, not from ordinary foolishness, but because he was the type of man who was unwilling to believe there might be anything he himself could not compass. As we took turns standing guard, the young mullah led the far from sleepy men in prayer. The voices rose up with the smoke, neither seeming to be of much substance against the wind of those old, cold mountains. I sidled over to the shepherd lad. He'd become, if anything, more close-mouthed since the discovery of the morning. This vampire you spoke of, I said quietly, what do your people do to protect themselves from it? He looked up at me with a sad smile. Lock the doors. I stared across at the other men. Young Fawn, with clenched mouth and furrowed brow. The mullah, Ruad, eyes closed, plump cheeks awash with sweat as he prayed. Ibn Fahad, gazing coolly outward, ever outward. And then I returned the boy's sad smile. No doors to lock, no windows to bar, I said. What else? There is a herb we hang about our houses, he said, and fumbled for the word in our unfamiliar language. After a moment, he gave up. It does not matter. We have none. None grows here. I leaned forward, putting my face next to his face. For the love of God, boy, what else? I knew it was not a beast of the earth. I knew. I had seen that fluttering shadow. Well, he mumbled, turning his face away. They say some men do that you can tell stories. What? I thought he had gone mad. This is what my grandfather says. The vampire will stop to hear the story you tell. If it's good one. And if you continue until daylight, he must return to the place of the dead. There was a sudden shriek. I leaped to my feet, fumbling for my knife, but it was only Ruad, the mullah, who had put his foot against a hot coal. I sank down again, heart hammering. Stories? I asked. I have only heard so, he said, struggling for the right phrases. We try To keep them farther than that, they must come close to hear a man talking. Later, after the fire had gone down, we placed sentries and went to our blankets. I lay a long while thinking of what the Ammonite boy had told me before I slept. A hideous screeching sound woke me. It was not yet dawn, and this time no one had burned himself on a glowing ember. One of the two soldiers who had been standing picket lay on the forest floor, blood gouting from a great wound on the side of his head. In the torchlight, it looked as though his skull had been smashed with a heavy cudgel. The other sentry was gone, but there was a terrible thrashing in the underbrush beyond the camp, and screams that would have sounded like an animal in a cruel trap, but for the half-formed words that bubbled up from time to time. We crouched, huddled, staring like startled rabbits. The screaming began to die away. Suddenly, Ruad started up, heavy and clumsy, getting to his feet. I saw tears in his eyes. We must not leave our fellow to suffer so, he cried, and looked around at all of us. I don't think anyone could hold the mullah's eye except the clerk Abdallah. I could not. Be silent, fool, the clerk said, heedless of blasphemy. It is a wild beast. It is for these cowardly soldiers to attend to, not a man of God. The young mullah stared at him for a moment, and a change came over his face. The tears were still wet on his cheeks, but I saw his jaw firm and his shoulders square. No, he said, we cannot leave him to Shaitan's servant. If you will not go to him, I will. He rolled up the scroll he had been nervously fingering and kissed it. A shaft of moonlight played across the gold letters. I tried to grab his arm as he went past me, but he shook me off with surprising strength and moved toward the brush where the screeching had died down to a low, broken moaning. Come back, you idiot! Abdallah shrieked at him. This is foolishness. Come back! The young holy man looked back over his shoulder. Darting a look at Abdallah I could not easily describe, then turned around and continued forward, holding the parchment scroll before him as if it were a candle against the dark night. There is no God but Allah, I heard him cry, and Muhammad is his prophet. Then he was gone. After a long moment of silence, there came the sound of the holy words of the Quran, chanted in an unsteady voice. We could hear the mullah making his ungraceful way out through the thicket. I was not the only one who held his breath. Next, there was a crashing and branches snapping as though some huge beast was leaping through the brush. The mullah's chanting became a howl. Men cursed helplessly. Before the cry had faded, though, another scream came, numbingly loud, the rage of a powerful animal full of shock and surprise, but it had words in it, though not in any tongue I had ever heard before or since. Another great thrashing, and then nothing but silence. We lit another fire and sat sleepless until dawn. In the morning, despite my urgings, the company went to look for trace of the sentry and the young priest. They found them both. It made a grim picture. Let me tell you, my friends, they hung upside down from the branches of a great tree. Their necks were torn, and they were white as chalk. All the blood had been drawn from them. We dragged the two stone-cold husks back to the camp circle, and shortly thereafter buried them commonly with the other sentry who had not survived his head wound. One curious thing there was. On the ground beneath the hanging head of the young priest lay the remains of his holy scroll. It was scorched to black ash and crumbled at my touch. So, it was a cry of pain we heard, said Ibn Fahad over my shoulder. The devil beast can be hurt, it appears. Hurt, but not made to give over, I observed, and no other holy writings remain, nor any hands so holy to wield them or mouth to speak them. I looked pointedly over at the clerk, Abdallah, who was giving unwanted instructions to the 2 remaining soldiers on how to spade the funeral dirt. I half hoped one of them would take it on himself to brain the old meddler. True, grunted Ibn Fahad. Well, I have my doubts on how cold steel will fare also. As do I. But it could be there is yet a way we may save ourselves. The shepherd boy told me of it. I will explain when we stop at midday. I will be waiting eagerly, said Ibn Fahad, favoring me with a half smile. I am glad to see that someone else is thinking and planning beside myself. But perhaps you should tell us your plan on the march. Our daylight hours are becoming precious as blood now. As a matter of fact, I think from now on we shall have to do without burial services. Well, there we were in a very nasty fix. As we walked, I explained my plan to the group. They listened silently, downcast, like men condemned to death. Not an unreasonable attitude, in all truth. Now, here's the thing, I told them. If this young lout's idea of tale-telling will work, we shall have to spend our nights yarning away. We may have to begin taking stops for sleeping in the daylight. Every moment walking, then, is precious. We must keep the pace up, or we will die in these damned, haunted mountains. Also, while you walk, think of stories. From what the lad says, we may have another 10 days or a fortnight to go until we escape this country. We shall soon run out of things to tell about unless you dig deep into your memories. There was grumbling, but it was too dispirited a group to offer much protest. Be silent, unless you have a better idea, said Ibn Fahad. Masrur is quite correct, although, if what I suspect is true, it may be the first time in his life he finds himself in that position. He threw me a wicked grin, and one of the soldiers snickered. It was a good sound to hear. We had a short midday rest. Most of us got at least an hour's sleep on the rocky ground, and then we walked on until the beginning of twilight. We were in the bottom of a long, thickly forested ravine where we promptly built a large fire to keep away some of the darkness of the valley floor. Ah, but fire is a good friend. Gathering around the blaze, the men cooked strips of venison on the ends of green sticks. We passed the water skin and wished it was more, not for the first time. Now then, I said, I'll go first, for at home I was the one called upon most often to tell tales, and I have a good fund of them. Some of you may sleep, but not all. There should always be 2 or 3 awake in case the teller falters or forgets. We cannot know if this will keep the creature at bay, but we should take no chances. So I began, telling first the story of the 4 clever brothers. It was early, and no one was ready to sleep. All listened attentively as I spun it out, adding details here, stretching a description there. When it ended, I was applauded, and straightway began telling the story of the carpet merchant, Salim, and his unfaithful wife. That was perhaps not a good choice. It is a story about a vengeful jinn and about death. But I went on nonetheless, finished it, then told 2 more. As I was finishing the 4th story, about a brave orphan who finds a cave of jewels, I glimpsed a strange thing. The fire was beginning to die down, and as I looked out over the flames, I saw movement in the forest. The under-vizier Walid was directly across from me, and beyond his once splendid robes, a dark shape lurked. It came no closer than the edge of the trees, staying just out of the fire's flickering light. I lost my voice for a moment then and stuttered, but quickly caught up the thread and finished. No one else had noticed, I was sure. I asked for the water skin and motioned for Walid al-Salameh to continue. He took up with a tale of the rivalry between 2 wealthy houses in his native Isfahan. 1 or 2 of the others wrapped themselves tightly in their cloaks and lay down, staring up as they listened. watching the sparks rise into the darkness. I pulled my hood down low on my brow to shield my gaze and squinted out past Waleed's shoulder. The dark shape had moved a little nearer now to the lapping glow of the campfire. It was man-shaped. That I could see fairly well, though it clung close to the trunk of a tree at clearing's edge. Its face was in darkness. Two ember-red eyes unblinkingly reflected the firelight. It seemed clothed in rags, but that could have been a trick of the shadows. Huddled in the darkness, a stone throw away, it was listening. I turned my head slowly across the circle. Most eyes were on the vizier. Fawn had curtained his in sleep, but Ibn Fahad, too, was staring out into the darkness. I suppose he felt my gaze, for he turned to me and nodded slightly. He had seen it, too. We went on until dawn, the men taking turns sleeping as one of the others told stories, mostly tales they had heard as children, occasionally of an adventure that had befallen them. Ibn Fahad and I said nothing of the dark shape that watched. Somewhere in the hour before dawn, it disappeared. It was a sleepy group that took to the trail that day, but we had all lived through the night. This alone put the men in better spirits, and we covered much ground. That night, as we sat again around the fire, I told the story of the Gazelle King and the enchanted peacock, and the little man with no name, each of them longer and more complicated than the one before. Everyone except the clerk, Abdallah, contributed something. Abdallah and the shepherd boy, that is. The chief clerk said repeatedly that he had never wasted his time on foolishness such as learning stories. We were understandably reluctant to press our self-preservation into such unwilling hands. The Armonite boy, our guide, sat quietly all the evening and listened to the men yarning away in a tongue that was not his own. When the moon had risen through the treetops, the shadow returned and stood silently outside the clearing. I saw the peasant lad look up. He saw it, I know, but like Ibn Fahad and I, he held his silence. The next day brought us two catastrophes. As we were striking camp in the morning, happily no fewer than when we had set down the night before, the local lad took the water skins down to the river that threaded the bottom of the ravine. When a long hour had passed and he had not returned, we went fearfully down to look for him. He was gone. All but one of the water skins lay on the stream bank. He had even filled them first. The men were panicky. "The vampire has taken him," they cried. "What does that foul creature need with a water skin?" pointed out Al-Salameh. "He's right," I said. "No, I'm afraid our young friend has merely jumped ship, so to speak. I suppose he thinks his chances of getting back are better if he's alone." I still wonder, if he made it back. He was not a bad fellow. Witness the fact that he took only one water bag and left us the rest. Thus we found ourselves once more without a guide. Fortunately, I had discussed with him the general direction, and he had told Ibn Fahad and myself of the larger landmarks. But it was nevertheless with sunken hearts that we proceeded. Later that day, in the early afternoon, the second blow fell. We were coming up out of the valley, climbing diagonally along the steep side of the ravine. The damned Caucasian fogs had slimed the rocks and turned the ground soggy. The footing was treacherous. Ahmed, the older of the remaining pikemen, had been walking poorly all day. He had bad joints anyway, he said, and the cold nights had been making them worse. We had stopped to rest on an outcropping of rock that jutted from the valley wall. Ahmed, the last in line, was just catching up to us when he slipped. He fell heavily onto his side and slid several feet down the muddy slope. Ibn Fahad jumped up to look for a rope, but before he could get one from the bottom of his pack, the other soldier, named Bakir, if memory serves, clambered down the grade to help his comrade. He got a grip on Ahmed's tunic and was just turning around to catch Ibn Fahad's rope when the leg of the older man buckled beneath him and he fell backward. Bakir, caught off his balance, pitched back as well, his hand caught in the neck of Ahmed's tunic, and the two of them rolled end over end down the slope. Before anyone could so much as cry out, they had both disappeared over the edge like a wine jug rolling off a tabletop. Just that sudden. To fall such a distance surely killed them. We could not find the bodies, of course, could not even climb back down the ravine to look. Ibn Fahad's remark about burials had taken on a terrible, ironic truth. We could but press on now, a party of 5. Myself, Ibn Fahad, the under-vizier Walid, Abdallah the clerk, and young Fawn. I doubt there was a single one of our number who did not wonder which of us would next meet death in that lonesome place. Ah, by Allah Most High, I have never been so sick of the sound of my own voice as I was by the time 9 more nights had passed. Ibn Fahad, I know, would say that I have never understood how sick everyone becomes of the sound of my voice. Am I correct, old friend? But I was tired of it, tired of talking all night, tired of racking my brain for stories, tired of listening to the cracked voices of Walid and Ibn Fahad, tired to sickness of the damp, gray, oppressive mountains. All were now aware of the haunting shade that stood outside our fire at night, waiting and listening. Young Fawn, in particular, could hardly hold up his turn at tale-telling, so much did his voice tremble. Abdallah grew steadily colder and colder, congealing like rendered fat. The thing which followed was no respecter of his cynicism or his mathematics, and would not be banished for all the scorn he could muster. The skinny chief clerk did not turn out to us, though, to support the story circle, but sat silently and walked apart. Despite our terrible mutual danger, he avoided our company as much as possible. The 10th night after the loss of Ahmed and Bakir, we were running out of tales. We had been ground down by our circumstances and were ourselves become nearly as shadowy as that which we feared. Walid al-Salameh was droning on about some ancient bit of minor intrigue in the court of the Emperor Darius of Persia. Ibn Fahad leaned toward me, lowering his voice so that neither Abdallah nor Fawn could hear. "Did you notice," he whispered, "that our guest has made no appearance tonight?" "It has not escaped me," I said. "I hardly think it a good sign, however. If our talk no longer interests the creature, how long can it be until its thoughts return to our other uses?" "I fear you're right," he responded and gave a scratchy, painful chuckle. "There's a good 3 or 4 more days walking, and hard walking at that, until we reach the bottom of these mountains and come once more into the plain, at which point we might hope that the devil beast would lead us." "Ibn Fahad," I said, shaking my head as I looked across at Fawn's drawn, pale face, "I fear we shall not manage." As if to point out the truth of my fears, Walid here stopped his speech, coughing violently. I gave him to drink of the water skin, but when he had finished, he did not begin anew. He only sat looking darkly, as one lost, out to the forest. "Good Vizier," I asked, "can you continue?" He said nothing, and I quickly spoke in his place, trying to pick up the threads of a tale I had not been attending to. Walid leaned back, exhausted and breathing raggedly. Abdallah clucked his tongue in disgust. If I had not been fearfully occupied, I would have struck the clerk. Just as I was beginning to find my way, inventing a continuation of the vizier's Darien political meanderings, there came a shock that passed through all of us like a cold wind, and a new shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing. The vampire had joined us. Walid moaned and sat up, huddling by the fire. I faltered for a moment, but went on. The candle flame eyes regarded us unblinkingly, and the shadow shook for a moment as if folding great wings. Suddenly, Fawn leaped to his feet, swaying unsteadily. I lost the strands of the story completely and stared up at him in amazement. "Creature!" he screamed. "Hellspawn! Why do you torment us in this way? Why? Why?" Ibn Fahad reached up to pull him down, but the young man danced away like a shying horse. His mouth hung open, and his eyes were starting from their dark-rimmed sockets. "You great beast!" he continued to shriek. "Why do you toy with us? Why do you not just kill me? Kill us all! Set us free from this terrible, terrible..." And with that he walked forward, away from the fire, toward the thing that crouched at forest's edge. "End this now!" Fawn shouted, and fell to his knees only a few strides from the smoldering red eyes. Sobbing like a child. "Stupid boy, get back!" I cried, before I could get up to pull him back. And I would have, I swear, by Allah's name. There was a great rushing noise, and the black shape was gone, the lamps of its stair extinguished. Then, as we pulled the shuddering youth back to the campfire, something rustled in the trees. On the opposite side of the campfire, one of the near branches suddenly bobbed beneath the weight of a strange new fruit, a black fruit with red-lit eyes. It made an awful croaking noise. In our shock, it was a few moments before we realized that the deep, rasping sound was speech, and the words were Arabic. "It was you," it said, "who chose to play the game this way." Almost strangest of all, I would swear that this thing had never spoken our language before, never even heard it until we had wandered lost into the mountains. Something of its halting inflections, its strange hesitations, made me guess it had learned our speech from listening all those nights to our campfire stories. "Demon!" shrilled Abdallah. "What manner of creature are you?" "You know very well what kind of thing I am, man. You may none of you know how or why, but by now you know what I am." Why do you torment us so?" shouted Fawn, writhing in Ibn Fahad's strong grasp. "Why does the serpent kill a rabbit? The serpent does not hate. It kills to live, as do I, as do you." Abdallah lurched forward a step. We do not slaughter our fellow men like this devil spawn." "Clerk!" the black shape hissed, then dropped down from the tree. "Close your foolish mouth. You push me too far." It bobbed as if agitated. "The curse of human ways. Even now you provoke me more than you should, you huffing insect. Enough!" The vampire seemed to leap upward, and with a great rattling of leaves, he scuttled along the limb of a tall tree. I was fumbling for my sword, but before I could find it, the creature spoke again from his high perch. "The young one asked me why I toy with you. I do not. If I do not kill, I will suffer more than I suffer already. Despite what this clerk says, though, I am not a creature without feelings, as men have them.
Less and less do I wish to destroy you. For the first time in a great age, I have listened to the sound of human voices that were not screams of fear. I have approached a circle of men without the barking of dogs and have listened to them talk. It has almost been like being a man again. And this is how you show your pleasure? The Under Vizier Walid asked, teeth chattering. By killing us? I am what I am, said the beast. But for all that, you have inspired a certain desire for companionship. It puts me in mind of things that I can barely remember. I propose that we make a bargain, said the vampire. A wager. And that's where I'm going to stop for the night, because I've already run a little bit longer than I meant to. But we're just getting to all the exciting part now. So, and where we find out more about everything and hear the actual stories instead of just having them referred to. So that makes a nice second half of the book. So with that, it's actually 12 after. I thought it was closer to 8 than that. So that is that for tonight. I want to thank you very much for joining me. I want to thank you for just being you, and as well as for everything else. I'm so grateful to have readers. In this case, listeners. Yes. In this case, listeners as well, but readers in general. I love sharing stories. I probably wouldn't be writing stories if nobody ever heard them or read them. So it's very, very important to me to have you, all of you, helping to support my serious weirdness fixation over making stories. Anyway, I want to say goodnight. I want you to all keep continuing to be good to those around you. I know you will, so please don't take offense, but keep being good, keep being kind, keep being patient. Think always that pretty much everybody else you meet has got tough things going on for them too. And some of them tougher than we can possibly imagine. I know that most of you already do that. So this is only sort of me reminding myself really more than anything else. And I have to do that. And me being me, I have to do it in words. So there you go. However, I do want to say also, thank you for joining me. Thank you for everything. Coming back next week. Until then, y'all be good. And I will see you later. And love and kisses from our house to your house. And